Story 1. In order of severity. 1. Australian bird-eating spider. 2. Bluebottle jellyfish. 3. Dog. 4. Parenty. 5. Bee. 6. Mud wasp. 7. Processionary caterpillar. Wombat. 9. Carpet python. 10. Koala. For context, I am an environmental scientist with a background as a wildlife ranger. I also work as a snake catcher and have done so for over a decade. Story 2. A yellow jacket climbed up the back of my shorts and stung me right near my rear. It hurt a lot. It wasn't like a normal bee sting. It felt as if it kept twisting. I had a big welt on my skin for a while. Story 3. While riding Goliath at Six Flags Magic Mountain, a bee flew into my mouth and bit me on the back of my throat. I spat it out and finished the ride, but I had a sore throat for the rest of the day. In hindsight, if I had been allergic, I could have faced a serious reaction before getting off the ride. Story 4. My cane corso had bone cancer and was in a lot of pain. He bit my wrist when I was trying to take him to the veterinarian. I loved that dog, but even just him nipping me made me think he broke my wrist. I don't even think that was a full-force bite. Story 5. Cow killer. I was about 7 years old. To this day, I don't think I've experienced such intense pain. It stings so strongly in the spot where it bites, but then the pain spreads throughout my entire body. I ran inside quickly, curled up into a ball, and cried. Story 6. I was 14 when I stepped on a cone snail while walking around tide pools in Hawaii. I was at the bottom of a short cliff by the water, went out a ways, and felt a little poke in my foot. I didn't think much of it because I was barefoot on the rocks, so I figured it was just a sharp rock. I kept walking, but the pain got worse very quickly. I assumed it was a jellyfish, as I had been stung several times before and knew they could wash up on the rocks and still sting. Before I could get back to the bottom of the cliff, my whole lower leg felt like it was exploding, and I couldn't move that leg at all. I pulled myself halfway up the rocks and realized I needed help. Some surfers pulled me up and got the lifeguards. One of them looked at my foot and told the other to boil water. He ran away and came back with an electric kettle full of water. I was in too much pain to pay much attention at that point, but my foot went numb soon after they started soaking it in hot water. This was fortunate because the water was so hot that I had minor blistering from it. I later learned that this heat likely saved my life by inactivating the venom. I became very confused and felt like I couldn't inflate my lungs to breathe. Apparently, I was breathing fine as my oxygen levels never dropped too low, but it felt like I had been shrink-wrapped. I don't remember much after that. I lived a couple of streets away and must have told someone where I lived because my dad showed up less than 10 minutes later and took me to the emergency room. In the end, I was fine. I went home the next morning after being monitored overnight. I could walk but couldn't move my toes or foot intentionally for about a week. I got really lucky. If it had been a different snail species or a bigger one, I could have died. Also, the lifeguard knowing to apply heat prevented any worse paralysis or heart symptoms. The worst part of the experience? I had only stopped at the beach after work to cool off, as I was landscaping for a family member's business, and I had just received my pay for 2 weeks in cash. That was in my bag along with my cell phone and other belongings. As soon as I became aware of being in the hospital and what was going on, a family member went to get my things. Unfortunately, someone had taken them, and they were never found. Here I was only 14 years old, having just lost about $600, my cell phone, and dealing with paralysis in one leg. The worst part? I didn't even get to keep the presumably gorgeous shell of the creature that almost killed me. Story 7. I got a dog when I was 15, but it only ripped my pants. It took me years to overcome my fear of dogs after I learned to pet my friend's 2 dachshunds. One is a hyperactive juvenile, and the other is his sister. The sister was wary of me, but after seeing her brother show me so much affection on my final day at my friend's house, she laid beside me. The little brother loved licking my face. Story 8. Swarmed by hornets once, I received 32 stings. It was not enjoyable. You could take a ruler and create a perfectly straight line of 6 stings across my body, resembling an unholy constellation. Story 9. I was covered with fire ants when I was 5 years old. I got distracted by a lily while sitting on an ant hill. I ran home, and my mom put me in a bathtub of water. Story 10. This may sound strange, but there is a bug known as the kissing bug. I believe it is also referred to as the assassin bug. Can cause quite a bit of pain. Story 11. Velvet ant. I learned the hard way that the cute, fuzzy ant is actually a very spicy wasp. Do not pick it up. Story 12. I was helping clear a dry hillside and hit an in-ground bee nest with my hoe. I didn't know that some bees make nests in the ground. I was stung more than 100 times, including in the mouth, and had to be taken to the hospital. Story 13. The aftermath of fire ants wasn't good. I stuck my hand in an ant pile on a dare in middle school, and my fingers swelled up to look like little sausages. Story 14. A German Shepherd took a tablespoon-sized chunk out of my 8-year-old rear end. When I was 32, I saved my dog after she dug up a yellow jacket nest and took quite a few stings in very sensitive areas. Edit. The sting from a velvet ant was incredibly painful. Story 15. They are gone now, but one of my rats was chasing another to harm him. I put my hand in between them to stop it and got a really good bite, which was dripping blood for about 5 minutes. Story 16. A small cat was sleeping on my chest while I was also napping. I started rolling over in my sleep, startling her, and she bit me on both lips. This obviously startled me, so in the split second I woke up, I grabbed at the creature attacking me and flung it as hard as I could. This caused her fangs to rip through the flesh of my lips as I wrenched her loose, causing about a pint of blood to spill from my face on the way to the hospital. This is why I would pass for an early 20th century German duelist if I shaved off my beard. Story 17. A sand wasp in Jamaica landed on the sole of my foot. I drank myself to sleep with red stripe that night. Story 18. Scorpions lived on the outskirts of Tucson, and I have been stung 40 times. I can distinguish bark scorpion stings from regular ones. Kissing bug bites are also miserable, and I am allergic to them. They are the only thing that has ever woken me up due to intense itching. The level of itch is comparable to being on fire. Story 19. The worst experience for me was with a German Shepherd that nearly crushed my upper arm. A close second was a cockatoo that bit me hard enough to embed its beak fully into my skin. It was more than an inch deep, and I had to have someone pull its beak out while I held its bottom beak with my free hand. Story 20. Not too bad, but a raccoon bit me on the hand through a Kevlar glove. It would have probably been much worse without the glove. Story 21. I was working at night in Africa. The locals warned me, saying, "Whatever you do, don't sweat the bugs that sting you." Well, I got stung by a flying insect at night and instinctively swatted it. By the next day, I developed blood poisoning. It seemed to have some kind of acidic effect. My entire neck and the side of my face had blackened capillaries. This happened in the middle of the jungle in Gabon. Additionally, there are mantis swarms and moths larger than a baseball glove. It's quite an interesting place. Story 22. I guess my experiences of getting chased by a rooster or headbutt by a ram were boring compared to some of these stories. Story 23. Did I think about the peacocks when I picked my sea green hoodie and matching mohawk hat? No. The peacocks at the zoo certainly had thoughts. The first one just displayed its feathers at me. The second one spread its tail and then lunged at my head, breaking my glasses and injuring my nose. I am bad at laundry and couldn't get the bloodstains out of my hoodie, so it was ruined. Story 24. I am an amateur beekeeper and was once stung by 44 bees on my ankles, where my suit did not cover me well. I ended up in the hospital. Story 25. A large bee stung me right on the top of my head. The initial pain wasn't too bad, but the headache afterwards was intense. My brain wasn't functioning properly for a while. Story 26. The most painful bite I have ever had was from an insect called a backswimmer that I scooped out of a pool with my bare hands to save it when I was a child. It did not need saving, as they can swim and fly. It felt like a hot nail had been driven through my hand. It was a unique sort of pain that I will never forget. Story 27. It might be either a yellow jacket stuck in my hair that kept stinging or my cat, who thinks it's a fun game to bite me and run away. Story 28. A colony of ants similar to fire ants was accidentally stepped on barefoot. I remember that my feet were shaking all night, even though I used a blanket, and I couldn't sleep at all. The pain was a mixture of stabbing sensations in my foot, with cramps so intense that I wanted to clench my toes tightly. As for the most dangerous animal that tried to attack me, it was somewhere between a man and a bull on my grandfather's farm. Fortunately, I got caught between some barbed wire. Story 29. A pack of wild mud daubers. My dog had it worse. He tried to dig up a nest in the ground and we got swarmed. I was stung about 15 times, and he got stung many more times right on the face. He looked like a lion afterward. Story 30. A scorpion crawled into my bed and stung me. I was sharing a bed with my sister, and she was stung twice. She needed help putting on her shirt because she was in a lot of pain. We spent the entire morning in the emergency room. Story 31. Wasps. When I was about 8, my grandparents took us to a large playground near their house. One area of it had a wasp nest. I was stung approximately 20 times. Story 32. The house cat's wrist swelled up like a softball. I was on heavy antibiotics for a while. A bite to the gums is very different from playful nibbling. Cats can be quite nasty. Story 33. Bite. I was bitten by a piranha, and a golden eagle grabbed me while I was trying to reach for her feet. She clutched my forearm and opened up the skin almost to the bone. A crocodile monitor whipped its tail across my bicep and back, leaving me with a scar for almost 10 years. Near miss. A lioness woke up from sedation 30 seconds early and nearly killed me. I was also bitten by the infamous harvestman, often miscalled the daddy long-legged spider. They are not the most venomous spiders, but their fangs are too small to do much harm. However, they do have small grinding mouthparts that pinch a little. The spider was missing several legs, so I took him home and nursed him until I could release him. Edit. Despite all this craziness, the worst sting I experienced was from a honeybee when I accidentally walked into a swarm. Story 34. A bull. However, the worst injury was caused by a little calf that unexpectedly leaped 4 feet in the air and kicked me on the back of the hand. I broke 4 bones, and my fingers still feel stiff 30 years later. Story 35. I was eating a sandwich and didn't see the yellow jacket that landed on the other side. I rotated and took a bite as one does. I wondered if there was a needle in my turkey. Nope, just the stinger in the roof of my mouth. Story 36. I was swimming off the coast of South Carolina when I screamed in terror and collapsed before I even realized what had happened. Story 37. I was a young child at my grandmother's farm for the summer. It was my job to collect the eggs every morning. One morning, the rooster attacked me, grabbing my arm and scratching me. I went back to the house and told my grandmother. We had him for dinner that night. Story 38. I was stung by hundreds of wasps when I slammed the barn door as a child. There was a hive above the door that I didn't see. I went into anaphylactic shock and spent 3 days in the hospital to recover from the venom. Story 39. I got stung by a velvet ant, also known as a cow killer, which is not just a dramatic name but an honest warning. Imagine someone heating a railroad spike until it's glowing red, then jamming it into your hand while all your nerve endings react violently. That's about right. Fun fact, it's not even an ant. It's a wingless wasp with the attitude of a Navy SEAL on espresso and a stinger that could warrant assault charges. Here's what I learned from the experience, besides the meaning of pain. Ice is your best friend. It won't undo your life choices, but it helps. Avoid this creature by any means necessary. Story 40. Human bite. I was bitten by another child in 2nd grade, and it broke the skin. I had to go to the doctor to ensure I did not contract any diseases. Story 41. A blue heeler bit my bone, but I was in shock and didn't feel it much. Then I picked up a rock and got stung by a scorpion, which really hurt. Story 42. I was nipped by a giant water bug once while trying to catch it for a closer look. Snapped at me out of nowhere. It didn't hurt much, but the fact that this creepy little insect had a real bite freaked me out more than a dog. I still have a little scar. Story 43. I was bitten by a small dog when I was a child. Frightened me, and I still don't really like dogs much to this day. Story 44. I once mowed over a yellow jacket's nest while wearing loose pajama pants. I had to fish them out of my pant leg and ended up with quite a few stings on my backside. I still love wasps, though. They were just protecting their home. Story 45. My cat didn't attack me. She was walking on the edge of my bunk bed and slipped off. As she fell, she clawed onto my chest to get a grip on something. It was the worst pain ever. It was not her fault at all. She was the most docile cat and loved to eat crisp snacks. She was best friends with our dog, and we would dress her up and push her in a doll's pram as kids. I miss her. Story 46. A horse bit me on my back when I was young during a school trip to a local farm. I remember it was a small bite, but it still hurt a lot. Story 47. Swarmed by yellow jackets while trying to rescue a goat that had become trapped in the brush and broken open their ground nest. She died, and I didn't come out too well. Story 48. At 10 years old, I was helping my mom put pine needles around the shrubs when an entire nest of hornets attacked me. Fortunately, I found out I am not allergic. Story 49. I was 10 years old and fishing on the bay side of the Gulf of Mexico. After returning to the hotel, I jumped into the pool without rinsing off. Whatever was on my skin began to sting. I had a severe reaction with pain and large red welts, prompting my parents to take me to the emergency room. I remember being given Benadryl and a breathing treatment, but I never found out what caused the reaction. Story 50. Fire ants. I was smoking a cigarette at the time and thought I dropped an ember on myself. Turned out to be ants. Caused a blister, and I had a scar for a few years. Years later, I splashed some formic acid on myself, and it felt similar and also caused a blister. Story 51. Head lice. When my kids were young, we all got head lice. It was extremely difficult to get rid of. It has nothing to do with cleanliness or financial status. When I say we, I mean my mother too. How embarrassing and disgusting. Story 52. When I was a kid, pet cats were mostly outdoors. My neighbor's cat was being attacked, literally dive-bombed by birds. I went to grab her and take her home, and the birds started attacking me. I was pretty freaked out. I guess some birds have memory because they attacked me for days afterward. I told my dad about the attacks and found out they were mockingbirds. They can be vicious when protecting their nests. He chased them away with the common tactics of the time, an owl decoy and hanging cut-up pieces of aluminum pans in the tree branches. Unfortunately, my most vicious attack was by two male humans. Story 53. I was walking down the road one day when a couple of dogs came running up, barking at me. That's normal. Usually, they just bark and go about their business. Not this time. They attacked my legs, biting down and jerking as if trying to pull my legs out from under me. I could feel blood running down my legs into my shoes, and I just knew that if I fell, they would maul me. A car drove by, pulled over, and started blaring the horn. I was literally fighting for my life to stay on my feet. The horn honking scared the dogs enough to release me, and I limped as fast as I could to that car. The dogs circled me like vultures as I reached the passenger door. I don't think I've ever felt fear like I did in that moment. The driver was an elderly woman, and she was on the phone with the police. The police told her to stay with me until they arrived. The dogs sniffed around and went about their business while we waited, and I was bleeding pretty badly into the floorboard of the woman's car. The police arrived with sirens and flashing lights, and the dogs ran off. One officer came to check on me while two others went after the dogs. The officer asked the woman if she could take me to the hospital, and she did. I thanked her and received stitches and shots. I don't know whatever happened to the dogs, but they were someone's pets. They looked well-groomed and fed. I imagine that if the police actually found them and their owners, they were likely euthanized. But that's just speculation. I honestly have no idea. Story 54. I was once bitten by a duck. The piece of bread I was offering broke, and the duck bit my finger instead. It did not hurt. The duck looked confused. Story 55. Mosquitoes. I have skeeter syndrome. Every bite turns into a softball-sized welt and is extremely painful and itchy. When the swelling goes down, you're left with a large bruise. Story 56. I was stung by a bee on the inside of my bottom lip after it crawled into my soda during lunch at school. My lip swelled out by about 3 inches. I was lucky. Some members of my family experienced severe allergic reactions. Story 57. My first job was at 14 or 15 on a golf course. I cleaned golf carts and manually picked golf balls off the range with a handheld tool. One day, while I was near the woods picking up balls, I thought I stepped on a branch, which then hit my leg. I looked down and saw a snake crawling away, along with 2 holes in my leg. I stood there for a minute to see if it would start hurting, but it never did, so I went back to work. I'm not sure what kind of snake it was, but thankfully it wasn't venomous. Story 58. Fire ants are a concern for me because I am highly allergic to them. One bite on my foot can cause my whole leg to swell up to my hip. Scorpion stings are extremely painful. I have also experienced jellyfish stings, which are moderately painful. A hornet attacked my face, resulting in a swollen black eye, and people kept giving my husband disapproving looks. Story 59. Human with severe psychiatric symptoms related to dementia. Pure zombie film. Grabbing, biting, and growling. It is important to clarify that those suffering from an illness are not animals. Rather, humans are technically classified as animals. Story 60. When I was in 6th grade, I had a bad nail-biting habit. When I chewed my nails down, I would start gnawing on the skin around them. In class, I had a piece of skin in my teeth, and when my teacher asked a question, I raised my hand as quickly as possible, unintentionally spraying the girl behind me in the face with my blood. It makes me shudder to think about it now. Story 61. A possum worked in a wildlife center. The critter was raised there, normally gentle, but when I picked her up to take her back to her enclosure, she bit my arm. A few steps later, she bit me again and hit a vein. Turns out she was ill and cranky. She never returned from the veterinarian. Possums have more teeth than any other land mammal in North America. Story 62. A baboon. This incident involved my husband, who was with our young children, aged 5 and a newborn, in a borrowed car. We stopped to show them a troop of baboons on the side of the road near Cape Point, South Africa. To everyone's surprise, the alpha male approached our car. He opened the door, jumped into the back seat on top of my 5-year-old, and began foraging for food. My husband, trained in military responses and very protective, quickly grabbed the animal to prevent it from harming our children. Unfortunately, the baboon bit him and grazed his arm with its long, dirty teeth. During the commotion, the car drifted backward toward a cliff overlooking the sea. Luckily, we collided with another onlooker's car, where things could have been much worse. My husband required rabies and tetanus shots, our children were very upset, and we significantly damaged my brother-in-law's car. The insurers back in Australia did not believe us when we attempted to make the claim. Story 63. A horse threw me off, came back around, bit my arm, dragged me along a bit, and then chased me up an apple tree. I was about 9 years old. They had no business putting me on that much horse at that age. Story 64. When I was 5, the family pet, a German shepherd, picked me up by the head and shook me. To be fair, I had just tripped and landed on him while he was napping, so I don't blame him at all. Once he realized who I was, he immediately released me and was very remorseful. I forgave him, he forgave me, and we were best friends for many years to come. Story 65. A ruby octopus bit me last year. I knew they had venom, so that was fine. I let it bleed to try and get as much venom and bacteria out, but I did not expect the swelling, burning pain traveling up my arm, and the nausea and headache that followed. Over the next 3 weeks, the venom very slowly killed the tissue in my hand, and I ended up having to get it surgically debrided and repaired. So I do not recommend it at all. Story 66. I have been very fortunate. The horsefly incident was the worst. A week later, half my leg was purple, and I wanted to remove it. Finally, I was able to see a doctor and receive antibiotics. Story 67. I grew up in the country, mowing the lawn on our acre. It was a riding lawn mower, actually my favorite childhood chore because riding it around was fun, until I ran over a beehive in the ground. Suddenly, there were bees everywhere stinging me all over. Couple even got in my mouth. Being a pretty bright kid, I immediately jumped off the mower, which had a dead man's switch, luckily, and raced across the land to our backyard because we had a swimming pool. I dove straight in fully clothed and stayed underwater as long as I could before finally coming back up. Mom actually saw the whole thing. She couldn't help, but said it was like a black cloud was following me and hovered over the pool where I had vanished for a good minute before leaving. She said it almost looked like an old cartoon. I had welts all over my face for a week, and yes, inside my mouth because of that. Thank goodness I wasn't allergic. Story 68. The tiny microscopic ant bit the bottom of my foot, and I had a large lump there for over a week. I am allergic to bees and ants, among others. I also had difficulty walking during that time. Story 69. A wasp sting right in the elbow bone was extremely painful. Being bitten by a rodent also hurts significantly. Story 70. A dog and a bee. The bee hurt worse, even though the dog bit a hole in my calf. I also felt betrayed by the bee. I have always been kind to bugs and try to take them outside when I catch them. The dog didn't bite out of anger. She was just playing with a friend and got confused. Her friend ran around my car while I was getting in. She saw me start to lift my leg into the car, got excited, and bit. Story 71. Caterpillar. I reached my hand around a sapling climbing up a small cliff in Talladega National Forest. The pain locked the right side of my hand and then moved up to my shoulder. It is supposedly called a pack saddle caterpillar. Are they Alabama's? Story 72. Stingray. He didn't get me with his teeth, but with the hard bone or cartilage under their mouths when I was feeding him. Thankfully, I didn't get stung. Story 73. Dog buck lunged and bit me on the kneecap as I approached him to offer my hand for a sniff. Before I could say, "Come at me, bro." Story 74. A bell hornet sting caused my leg to swell like a balloon. The sting site turned black, and a piece of my leg fell out. Years later, I still have a pit where the piece died and fell out. Story 75. Red-bellied black snake. One piece of advice. Do not wear thongs if you are walking through long grass. Story 76. I was stung about 12 times by hornets when I was a teen. I broke out in hives, and I was lucky that my mom was thinking clearly enough to get me Benadryl. Story 77. I stepped on an in-ground bee's nest when I was little, maybe 7 or 8 years old. I got stung around 15 times before I was able to jump into the pool. It was an unpleasant experience. Story 78. I was bitten by a dog on the hand when I was in elementary school. I was inexperienced and trying to get it away from the cat food my cousin put out. I still have a couple of scars. I was stung by multiple wasps on my face, one near my eye. It was an eventful trip to urgent care, and then I had to go to work the next day. Story 79. I was attacked by a horse when I was 12. He was a champion sire, and someone brought out a mare at the wrong time. I was holding him when he bit me on the neck, leaving scratches from my neck to my collarbone. Story 80. The tarantula hawk wasp is usually calm, but I encountered one on a bad day. When I tried to get too close for a macro photograph, it stung me. I fell to the ground, feeling as if I had been stabbed with a red-hot crowbar. Story 81. I was bitten in the face by a dog when I was a child. It was my fault. I didn't listen to the owners who warned me not to hug it around its neck. It was a frightening experience, but I ended up being fine. I was also bitten on my ear by a kana, and that injury took a month to stop bleeding whenever I touched the area to clean it. Story 82. It's not bad. It just felt offensive. I was bitten by a swan as a child. I didn't expect to bleed from it. I mostly cried from the shock. Story 83. A dog bite was the worst experience. I was bitten by a few dogs, with the worst being a terrier mix. I needed 4 or 5 stitches and was 9 or 10 years old at the time. The second worst incident involved a chihuahua bite. Story 84. Bald-faced hornets. I was trimming some shrubs and disturbed their nest. The aggressive insects chased me across the backyard, and I was stung by 5 of them. I called an exterminator the next day. Story 85. I was trying to get a goat unstuck from a fence because it was eating a weed. While doing that, a wasp came and stung me a few times in the neck. Story 86. A bee stung me on my toe while I was close to finishing. I wondered what kind of experience this was. Story 87. Rabbit took out my entire nail and cut deep. Monty Python was not wrong. We still love our rabbit, though. Story 88. Dusty was the worst animal. Not in a deadly way, just the worst animal I have been bitten by. She was mean, desperately unstable, and a golden retriever, so no one cared that she bit any kid in the neighborhood she could catch. My neighbor never had her on a leash because she only knew a few commands, none of which were "don't bite kids." Dusty bit straight through my sneaker while I was wearing it, and all the older kids ran off and left me. I have also been bitten by other dogs, cats, stung by wasps, an emu, and numerous parrots, but Dusty and Bubble will forever be remembered as inexplicably bad. Bubble was at least technically defensively reactive. Dusty chased me down and got me. Bubble was a rabbit who inflicted a severe injury on my arm from wrist to elbow. Story 89. One was a wasp that had flown inside my shoe and stung me under the big toe. I'm allergic, so that was quite an experience. It feels like a red-hot needle getting shoved under your skin. The other incident involved my childhood Siamese cat. I was 15 or 16 and packing my bag to hang out with friends. The cat was next to my bag and seemed to be in a playful mood. So he jumped to catch the piece of clothing I was putting in and got my arm instead. There were 2 deep punctures right in a major vein in my forearm. I was bleeding in spurts that matched my heartbeat. I called my dad over because I didn't feel well. He was startled when he saw me lying on the floor, pale and covered in blood. I had him patch me up and went to my friend's house anyway because there was no way I was missing an opportunity to get drunk in the woods. It was painful and swollen for a good week. My mom was upset that I didn't get checked out by a doctor immediately. I'm lucky it didn't get infected. Apparently, deep cat bites can be dangerous. I still have the little puncture scars to this day. I have a tattoo sleeve on that arm now, but they are still visible. Story 90. Australian green ants are highly aggressive creatures. I have never seen an organism so intent on causing harm to humans. The stings are not the worst part. If you spend time sitting outside in certain parts of Australia, you can end up with several bites that can sting for days. I have also been bitten by larger snakes, such as carpet pythons, but they are not too troublesome. They bleed for a little while, but you barely notice it after about 15 minutes. Story 91. I don't remember it, but I had my feet bitten quite badly by soldier ants when I was a toddler. I also had a mild case of malaria, so I guess I can add a mosquito to the list. Story 92. The poor little skunk was sideswiped by a car. I pulled over to try and usher it out of the road. I scooped him up in an old blanket and moved him to a field to keep him safe while I made calls to wildlife rescues for possible rehabilitation. I had to call many places, but I kept being told they were full. I was continually having to shuffle along the shoulder because the sad little creature would sometimes stagger back toward the road. One very kind lady asked how he was behaving now that it had been about 20 minutes after being hit. I told her he was stumbling and walking in circles a bit, bleeding from his mouth and drooling a little. She paused and quietly asked, "And he was just out there in the road in the middle of the day?" That's how I learned that skunks are a major rabies vector. His little mouth never clamped down on my hand, but the psychological stress of dealing with health insurance for the rabies vaccine and having to advocate for myself at the hospital because I didn't have an open bite wound was overwhelming. We vaccinate if a bat comes near us to be safe, since rabies has almost a 100% fatality rate. The constant intrusive thoughts about dying from rabies, especially any time I felt even slightly headachy or sick, made skunks seem even worse. However, it's almost my 1-year rabies anniversary, so I'm statistically most likely out of the woods. As a side note, a black bear is my runner-up. I had a literal encounter on the highway and almost didn't walk away from that one. Wildlife is not friendly, even when shaped like a friend. Story 93. Top 3 are 1. Stepped on a buck moth that left a perfect C-shaped wound on the inner arch of my foot. I couldn't walk on it for a couple of days. A red sea nettle stung me on the thigh when I was about 5 years old. I didn't realize what was happening until the current snagged the entire inner bell against my skin, with the tentacles wrapping around the back of my leg. I was a professional beekeeper who didn't like to wear protective gear for a few years. The worst experience I can recall is when a bee stung me right inside my nostril, or when one got close enough to a nerve with a sting on my forehead that I felt pain down into the roots of my teeth. Story 94. Shovel-nosed catfish have spines in their fins that contain a stinging toxin worse than that of a hornet. I was impaled while attempting to catch one. An electric eel shocked me once, and it knocked me silly, but the effect lasted only for a fraction of a second. Story 95. I got straight knocked out by an unleashed dog that jumped a fence when I was a kid. I hit my head on the pavement and woke up 45 minutes later in the nurse's office. To be fair, it was a golden retriever in peak jumping mode. I don't think they punished the dog, to my knowledge, and I don't think they should have. It's not like it bit me, and like I said, golden retrievers are just goofballs. Story 96. Portuguese man of war. It hurt significantly. Interestingly, my sister pulled the tentacles off me and did not get stung. Story 97. A rooster. I don't know what he had against me. I would be trying to feed the chickens, and he would fly at me and claw my legs. Story 98. The other week, I was dive-bombed by a crow for standing and texting too long near its nest on a busy street. I ended up with 3 small blood marks on my scalp. Story 99. I was bitten by a tick in my belly button once, which I didn't discover until it was very engorged. I was stung by a wasp, which makes a bee sting feel like a paper cut. Story 100. Raccoon. My finger is likely damaged for life, and I had to go to the hospital 3 times to receive all the rabies vaccinations. Story 101. A horsefly got caught in my poncho on a rainy day at summer camp. It took a surprisingly large bite out of the skin on my shoulder. I understood why a horse I had been riding the previous summer took off and threw me when she got bitten. Story 102. Working in a barn one summer, a bumblebee stung me in my armpit. It wouldn't have been so bad if it had not been in a place I couldn't avoid touching. Story 103. Scorpion. 1. It was a baby, and it released all the venom it had. According to Poison Control, it was the most poisonous species in the United States. They essentially said good luck. As long as she isn't foaming at the mouth, just endure the pain. Story 104. When I was a kid, my mom bought some live crabs for dinner. She placed them in the sink and went to prepare the meal. I found them interesting and kept poking them. When I turned my head for just a moment, one of the crabs pinched my finger. Panicking and crying, I flailed around while the crab stayed on my finger until my dad came over and removed it. My parents then scolded me, and I learned a valuable lesson that day. Story 105. A water bug, also known as a toe biter, was on the edge of the lake where I was wading in to fish, and it tagged me on the side of my foot. I saw literal stars after I was bitten. There were actual sparks of light in my vision as my brain processed what had just happened. The pain was so overwhelming that I couldn't scream at first. I just went totally rigid as I silently shouted and then vomited from the pain. I'm pretty sure I blacked out because my next recollection was being carried out of the lake by my grandfather and finally starting to scream. Story 106. I was bitten in the face by a Rottweiler when I was 2 years old. I don't remember the incident, but I still have the scar, and my parents have told me about it. I don't think anything happened to the dog because it was an accident. Story 107. Almost trampled by a giant majestic moose. I quickly remembered that generally moose don't have very big brains, and by jumping behind a massive power line pole, I ceased to exist to the moose. She grunted a lot and sniffed around, but eventually got bored. Story 108. The giant water bug is hands down the worst pain I have ever felt. I would rather get my hand caught in a car door again. Never trust a small child not to slam the car door while you are fixing the door guide fastener. Story 109. A yellow jacket flew into my ear canal when I was a child and started stinging. If it wasn't the most painful experience, it is certainly the one I remember almost 35 years later. Story 110. A Portuguese man-o-war wrapped around my arm while I was swimming at night during my vacation in Jamaica. I ended up in a Jamaican emergency room. It felt like a hot, burning, stinging electric fire for a few days. I do not recommend it. Story 111. Rattlesnake. Western Diamondback. Just a little guy. He didn't even have his rattle yet, so he couldn't warn me. I was about 10 or 11 years old when I went outside barefoot around sunset to pull the garbage bin in from the street, and he was hiding underneath. He caught me in the ankle. I was very surprised and dropped the bin, not realizing until later that I had squashed the poor thing. The initial bite was a very sharp pain, not that far off from what I've heard being shot feels like. There was very little bleeding from the 2 punctures. That was immediately followed by an awful burning sensation and a strong muscle ache radiating outward from my ankle, which eventually decreased in intensity but grew outward to affect my whole leg. My mom put some ice and a dressing on it, then drove me to the hospital after I hobbled inside the house and told her what happened. By the time we arrived at the emergency room, I couldn't walk. The pain had subsided somewhat, but the swelling prevented me from bending my knee very far, and I had a tingling sensation like my foot was asleep. I remember beginning to feel very tired, weirdly euphoric, and a little feverish at some point between the end of the car ride and getting my vitals checked. I'm told my whole leg turned purple and blue at some point, but I didn't really get a good look after they started treating me. That night, after I was stabilized, I had to take a helicopter ride to a different hospital because the first one didn't have any pediatric beds available in the intensive care unit. But I didn't get to enjoy it because I was strapped to a gurney and forced to stare at the ceiling the whole time. 2 out of 10 would not recommend it. Story 112. Not me, but my husband grew up in Central America with various venomous animals. First place goes to the fer-de-lance. He didn't see it while riding his bike and rode right over its tail, which caused it to sideswipe his knee. He barely made it home, told his mother what happened, and then passed out. He says the next thing he remembers is waking up in the hospital a day later. Second place goes to the blue warrior wasps. He brought it on himself because he and his cousins were trying to knock the nest down by throwing rocks at it. He said it felt like his blood was replaced by fire. Story 113. I was attacked by a nest of yellow jackets when I was 8. 7 stings at once was rough. I will never forget that pain. Story 114. I have been stung 3 times by scorpions, bitten by a territorial triggerfish, stung by jellyfish, bitten by a squirrel, and bitten by deer flies numerous times. The scorpion sting was the worst, but the pain only lasted about an hour. Deer fly bites swelled and itched for a week, becoming feverish. Story 115. I think the worst was my friend's cockatiel. I have been stung by pretty much everything. Jellyfish, wasps, and bees, but the cockatiel brought tears to my eyes. Those beaks are no joke. Story 116. I was bitten by an assassin bug once while playing with my porch plants. It was as painful as you would expect, with intense pain and swelling. Fortunately, the insect that bit me did not transmit any disease. Story 117. Nosalis gigantes is a large, man-eating rat native to the Chernobyl exclusion zone. It has sharp claws and a brutal bite, even as a juvenile. Story 118. During gym class in high school, we were playing kickball outside on the grass when suddenly I felt a sharp pain in the back of my leg. I sat down for a few minutes, and the pain slowly subsided, leaving a small red bump. I took a picture and asked some online friends if they knew what it was. One said it looked like a horsefly bite. Story 119. An injured adult osprey at work in British Columbia. Fire ants in Scottsdale, Arizona. Iguana at work. Major equestrian injury events, for instances. Raccoon at work. Cats and dogs at work. Story 120. Well, if we're solely speaking about things I can identify, then dog. That wasn't the worst, though. Something bit me while I was exploring some local caves, and in less than 12 hours, I almost had a full-blown staph infection in my ankle. I didn't even know anything had bitten me. I left the caves in the late afternoon, and around 11 p.m., I noticed my ankle was extremely itchy. I looked down and saw it was swollen to easily 3 times its normal size. I went to the hospital immediately, and they couldn't identify what it was but told me I was at high risk of losing my foot. I spent a lot of time in the hospital. I still have my foot. I don't go into caves anymore. I still don't know what bit me. Story 121. I have been hospitalized for Rocky Mountain spotted fever, ehrlichiosis, and Lyme disease. Thank you, Maryland. Story 122. A jellyfish. When I was in middle school on a camping trip at the beach, I accidentally stepped on a jellyfish without realizing it. Suddenly, my legs started to feel numb and painful. Story 123. A bullet ant stung me when I was about 12. I grew up in a tropical climate, and one crawled into my shoe, which had been placed in our laundry room at the back corner of our house, next to the lushest part of our yard. I couldn't walk for the rest of the day, but I have always had a very high pain threshold. That was an incredibly painful experience. Story 124. Pitbull. I jumped in front of my little brother when we were kids and took the attack. I screamed for him to run. Story 125. I have had pet snakes all my life and have been bitten many times. It usually doesn't hurt. The only time it did hurt was when my python bit my ear and twisted around it. I was also bitten by a Rottweiler on the leg as a child. Story 126. One time when I was about 2, my family was on vacation in Australia. We were walking when a kangaroo suddenly appeared and lunged at me, sticking me in its pouch. Quickly realized I wasn't its baby and threw me across the entire field. Only my sister remembers this happening. Story 127. A swarm of wasps was in my crotch. I was busy swatting them out of my dog's fur and then realized they were attacking me too. That hurt for a while. My dog was fine, her thicker fur saved her. Story 128. Blue bottle jellyfish, from my bicep to my wrist. Bees 6 times in my life. The worst sting was on the bottom of my toe. It became very swollen and painful. Story 129. Some sort of jellyfish. My feet were barely in the water when it washed up on me on the Oregon coast. It was the worst pain I have ever felt. Story 130. I don't know what kind of wasp it was, but it was one that digs in the ground. My mom thought it would be smart to drown them during the day. The only one that didn't get stung was our dog. Story 131. Cocker Spaniel, Chihuahua, and Beagle are some of the dogs I encountered in my childhood. The fault was usually mine for being a young child and running too fast past an untrained dog. I have also been bitten or stung by several invertebrates I handled, but not to the point where blood was drawn or skin was torn off, as with the dogs. This experience has left me with a lifelong distaste for untrained small dogs and their thoughtless owners. Story 132. Rat mite. The itch was unbearable. Nobody, including doctors, understood what it was until I called the county extension office. The expert recognized it when he came over to our newly purchased house. Story 133. My neighbor's dog attacked me when I was 15 during a run in my rural neighborhood. I always ran on the opposite side of the road when passing houses with dogs to avoid making them feel threatened. This time, the dog was in the street, and when I turned to run back the way I came, I tripped and fell. When I got up, the dog lunged at me, and before I knew it, my hand was in its mouth. My right hand and elbow took most of the impact. I received some stitches and have minimal scars, but that was a wild run back home. Story 134. My ball python bit me once. When I was 12, I was bitten in the face by a pit bull, and I was bitten by a horse at 6. Story 135. An ASP and then a red wasp. I've been stung in 2 places by a wasp. Under my chin and my left nipple. Yes, my left nipple. Story 136. Wood ticks. I've been bitten by worse, but nothing instills more fear and creepiness than those little pests. They are the only creatures from which I derive real satisfaction in eliminating. I use fire. Additionally, there's always the chance you may have to live with chronic pain and illness for the rest of your life. Lyme disease is no joke. Story 137. A box turtle. When I was 9 or 10 years old, I stuck my index finger right in front of it. The turtle saw an opportunity and bit my finger. It was one of the sharpest and most intense pains I have ever felt. Story 138. An assassin bug nymph bit me through my shirt. It hurt for days. I'll never forget that bite. Story 139. It wasn't terribly traumatic, but we were at my daughter's apartment checking out her hedgehogs, commenting on how nice and tame they were, when one decided to latch onto my palm and dangle from my hand as everyone laughed. Story 140. Old roommates have a savage husky that has bitten multiple people unprovoked and attacked dozens of dogs. They truly believe he isn't the problem and conveniently forget about half the bites. One of the bites I received was on my mid-thigh. It turned purple and black, and the area was rock hard for weeks. I love all dogs, but I dislike that dog. Story 141. Some variation of the carpenter ant bit my forearm once. It was getting worse quickly. My entire forearm was red and swollen within hours. I think I had to go to the emergency room. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.